The late autumn of 1944 brings a suffocating stagnation to the sprawling battlefields of the Western Front, where the momentum of a glorious summer has dissolved into a slurry of freezing mud and gray despair. General George S. Patton, a commander whose very identity is forged in the fires of rapid mobility and aggressive conquest, finds himself trapped in a war of attrition that offends his cavalryman's soul. The grand sweep across France, which saw his Third Army devouring terrain and liberating cities with breathless speed, has ground to a halt against the fortifications of Lorraine and the obstinate refusal of the elements to cooperate. Rain falls with a relentless, dispiriting consistency, turning the earth into a quagmire that swallows tank tracks and rots the feet of infantrymen. The distinct optimism that the war might conclude by Christmas has evaporated, replaced by the grim reality of a winter campaign against an enemy that, while battered, refuses to break. Patton moves through this sodden landscape with a restless energy, his presence a calculated performance of martial confidence designed to bolster the sagging morale of his troops. He travels the lines in an open jeep, rain lashing his face, ensuring that he is seen by the men shivering in waterlogged foxholes. He wears his polished helmet and carries his ivory-handled pistols, projecting an image of invincibility even as he privately seethes at the logistical strangulation and the weather that conspire to immobilize his armor. The capture of Metz, a fortress city surrounded by a ring of imposing defenses, offers a tactical victory but comes at a bruising cost. The fighting is intimate and vicious, a subterranean struggle in tunnels and bunkers that yields piles of dead but no strategic breakthrough into the German heartland. In the hospitals, Patton encounters the human wreckage of this stalemate, offering words of praise to the wounded while harboring a deep, corrosive frustration that his operational genius is being wasted in a static slugfest. Beneath the surface of this military deadlock, a deeper anxiety gnaws at the Third Army's command. While the Allies contend with supply shortages and the misery of the elements, the German army is largely invisible, hidden behind the veil of the dense Ardennes forest and the prevailing cloud cover that grounds the potent Allied air forces. Intelligence reports, meticulously compiled by Patton's trusted officer Colonel Oscar Koch, begin to paint a picture that contradicts the prevailing Allied consensus of a broken enemy. Koch tracks the movement of panzer divisions withdrawing from the line for refitting, the accumulation of rolling stock, and the eerie radio silence that often presages a major operation. He identifies a massive concentration of enemy armor and infantry gathering just beyond the American lines, a reserve force of frightening magnitude. While the Supreme Command at Versailles interprets German inactivity as a sign of impending collapse, Patton and his staff sense a coiled spring waiting to snap. The tension within Patton is palpable as December deepens. He is a man who believes fervently in the power of will and the intervention of the divine in the affairs of men. Faced with weather that neutralizes his greatest advantages, air power and mobility, he turns to a higher authority. In a move that typifies his unique blend of eccentricity and sincere faith, he summons his chief chaplain, James O'Neill, to his headquarters in a damp French barracks. Patton demands a prayer to break the weather, viewing the ceaseless rain not merely as a meteorological phenomenon but as a tactical obstacle to be overcome through spiritual artillery. O'Neill, initially taken aback by the request for a weather-specific petition, composes a prayer asking for fair skies to enable the destruction of the enemy. Patton, satisfied with the wording, orders it printed on hundreds of thousands of small cards to be distributed to every soldier in his command. It is a gesture of supreme confidence and desperation, an attempt to mobilize the collective spiritual force of his army to clear the skies and open the road to the Rhine. While Patton distributes prayers and frets over mud in the south, a vastly different scene unfolds to the north, across the border in Germany. In a secluded, fortified command complex known as the Adlerhorst, Adolf Hitler gathers his generals for a final, desperate gamble. The Führer, physically diminished by illness and the aftereffects of a recent assassination attempt, remains intellectually fixated on a masterstroke that will shatter the Western Alliance. He outlines a plan of audacious scope, a massive surprise offensive through the Ardennes, the very route used to humiliate France in 1940. The objective is the port of Antwerp, the seizure of which would sever Allied supply lines and split the British and American armies. His generals, pragmatic professionals who understand the terrifying material superiority of the Allies, listen with skepticism masked by obedience. They know the plan relies on a cascade of miracles: bad weather to ground Allied planes, the capture of American fuel stocks to feed thirsty panzers, and a speed of advance that seems impossible given the terrain. Yet the machinery of the German state, even in its twilight, retains the capacity to assemble a terrifying striking force. Under the cloak of night and heavy forests, three armies muster in secrecy, a ghost force of tanks, artillery, and hundreds of thousands of men waiting for the order to strike. The sector chosen for this assault, the Ardennes, is thinly held by American forces who regard it as a quiet sanctuary from the horrors of the Hurtgen forest and other active fronts. It is a ghost front, manned by inexperienced divisions fresh from the States and battered units licking their wounds. The soldiers here live in a world of snowy stillness, manning widely dispersed outposts and sleeping in farmhouses, unaware that they are standing in the path of a hammer blow. The complacency extends to the highest levels of Allied command, where the possibility of a German offensive is dismissed as a fantasy of a dying regime. Even as the engines of Tiger tanks rumble in the assembly areas just miles away, the American front remains dangerously porous, a thin crust covering a vulnerable interior. In the pre-dawn darkness of December 16th, the silence of the Ardennes is shattered by a cataclysmic artillery barrage. Thousands of guns open fire simultaneously, turning the American positions into a churning hell of fire and shrapnel. The earth heaves under the impact, and the night sky is lit by the flashes of explosions that tear through telephone lines and command posts, severing communications and plunging the defenders into isolated chaos. As the barrage lifts, the German infantry emerges from the mist, ghostly figures in winter camouflage advancing behind the grinding treads of heavy armor. Searchlights bounce off the low clouds, creating an artificial moonlight that illuminates the terror of the raw American recruits facing seasoned SS troopers. The sheer scale of the violence induces immediate panic in some sectors, while in others, isolated pockets of GIs fight with desperate, doomed courage against overwhelming odds. The German onslaught punches gaping holes in the American line. In the center, the 106th and 28th Infantry Divisions are swamped by the tide of gray uniforms. Entire regiments are cut off, surrounded, and forced to surrender or scatter into the woods. The roads, vital arteries for the German advance, become clogged with fleeing vehicles and refugees, creating a chaotic tableau of defeat. Spearheading the German thrust is a powerful armored battle group led by the ruthless SS commander Jochen Peiper. His column of heavy tanks bulldozes through the flimsy American defenses, driven by a mandate of speed and terror. Peiper's orders are to ignore his flanks and race for the Meuse River, sowing confusion and panic in his wake. His path is marked by burning villages and the corpses of those who stand in his way, a brutal testament to the ferocity of the German desperate gamble. News of the breakthrough trickles back to Allied headquarters in fragments, obscured by severed communications and the fog of war. Initially, the magnitude of the disaster is poorly understood. Commanders in the rear struggle to reconcile reports of heavy tank columns with their belief that the Germans are incapable of offensive action. It takes time for the realization to dawn that this is not a local counterattack but a strategic offensive of massive proportions. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, at his headquarters in Versailles, is among the first to grasp the seriousness of the situation, correctly identifying the German move as a major effort rather than a spoiling attack. He orders the commitment of the Theater Reserve, the airborne divisions recovering from earlier battles, to rush to the front. Patton, meanwhile, watches the developing situation from his headquarters in Luxembourg with a grim sense of vindication. His intelligence officer, Koch, has prepared him for this possibility, and while others scramble to react, Patton has already begun to mentally draft contingency plans. He recognizes that the German offensive, while dangerous, presents a unique opportunity. By emerging from their fortifications and extending themselves into the open, the Germans have exposed their flanks to a counterstroke. Where others see disaster, Patton sees the potential for a decisive battle of annihilation, provided he can maneuver his army with sufficient speed to strike the enemy when they are most vulnerable. As the German columns drive deeper into Belgium, the strategic crossroads town of Bastogne becomes a focal point of the battle. 7 roads converge on the town, making it essential for the movement of German supplies and armor. The race for Bastogne becomes a desperate contest between the advancing German Panzer Corps and the hastily deployed American reinforcements. The 101st Airborne Division, the Screaming Eagles, are pulled from their rest areas in France and trucked through the night to the threatened sector. They arrive in Bastogne ill-equipped for winter warfare, lacking sufficient ammunition and cold weather gear, but possessing a combat pedigree and a defiant spirit. They establish a defensive perimeter around the town just as the German pincers close, turning Bastogne into an island of resistance in a sea of enemy control. The situation on the battlefield deteriorates rapidly. To the north of Bastogne, widespread confusion reigns as American units disintegrate or fight isolated delaying actions. The atrocities committed by the advancing SS units, particularly the massacre of American prisoners near Malmedy, inject a new, savage intensity into the fighting. Word of the killings spreads like wildfire among the GIs, hardening their resolve and stripping the conflict of any remaining vestiges of chivalry. It becomes a kill-or-be-killed struggle in the freezing snow, fought with a bitterness that matches the brutality of the weather. Eisenhower, recognizing that the split in the Allied lines necessitates a reorganization of command, transfers the American armies on the northern shoulder of the Bulge to the temporary control of British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery. This decision, while militarily sound given the disruption of communications, bruises American egos and adds a layer of political tension to the crisis. To the south, however, the response is purely American and purely Patton. Eisenhower convenes a critical conference at Verdun on December 19, summoning his senior commanders to a damp, chilly barracks to devise a response to the German breakthrough. The atmosphere in the room is heavy with gloom. The map shows a massive German salient gouging deep into the Allied front, threatening to reach the Meuse and beyond. At this conference, Eisenhower asks Patton how long it will take for him to disengage his Third Army from its current offensive in the Saar, turn it 90 degrees to the north, and launch a counterattack into the southern flank of the German penetration. It is a logistical request of staggering difficulty, involving the movement of tens of thousands of men and thousands of vehicles across icy roads that cut across the existing lines of communication. Most commanders would require days, if not weeks, to plan and execute such a maneuver. Patton, however, has already alerted his staff. When the question is posed, his answer is immediate and shocking to those present. He declares that he can attack with 3 divisions in 48 hours. The room is stunned. Some suspect Patton is boasting, indulging in his characteristic bravado. But Patton is deadly serious. He has his staff working on 3 separate operational code words, each triggering a complex redeployment depending on Eisenhower's decision. When he leaves the meeting, he makes a simple phone call to his headquarters, unleashing a whirlwind of activity that will become one of the most remarkable feats of generalship in the war. The Third Army, a massive machine of men and steel, begins its great pivot. It is a movement of intricate complexity performed under the worst possible conditions. Snow and ice glaze the roads, and the temperatures plummet, freezing men and machines alike. Yet, the army moves with a fluidity that defies the friction of war. Divisions are pulled out of active combat, reoriented, and sent marching north into the teeth of the German offensive. Patton drives his subordinates relentlessly, his jeep a constant presence along the columns, his voice urging speed and aggression. He treats the impossible logistical demands as mere details to be overcome by willpower and discipline. The entire army seems to absorb his energy, transforming from a force bogged down in trench warfare into a mobile hammer poised to strike. As Patton's forces wrestle with the logistics of their reorientation, the defenders of Bastogne face a tightening noose. Completely surrounded, cut off from supply lines and support, the paratroopers and stragglers within the perimeter endure constant shelling and probing attacks. The Germans, desperate to clear the crossroads, launch repeated assaults, testing the American lines for weakness. The medical situation inside the town becomes critical. The division's field hospital was captured in the opening days, leaving the wounded with scant care in makeshift aid stations. Ammunition stocks dwindle, and the cold gnaws at the defenders, who lack winter boots and adequate coats. Despite the dire circumstances, the morale within the perimeter remains stubbornly high, anchored by a collective refusal to yield. The town becomes a symbol, a hole in the donut of the German advance that denies the enemy the victory they so desperately need. The German commander encircling Bastogne, frustrated by the delay, sends a delegation to the American lines under a white flag, delivering an ultimatum: surrender or face total annihilation by concentrated artillery. The American commander's response is a single, dismissive piece of slang that confuses the German interpreter but perfectly encapsulates the defiance of the defenders. The rejection of the surrender demand ensures that the fighting will intensify, but it also buys time that Patton is burning up on the icy roads to the south. By December 21st, the shortest day of the year, the situation is poised on a knife edge. The weather remains atrocious, a thick blanket of fog and low clouds that grounds the Allied Air Force and shields the German movements. Patton's columns are pushing north, fighting not just the enemy but the elements. His tanks slide on the ice, and his infantry trudge through snowdrifts, their progress measured in agonizing yards. Yet, the relief force is taking shape, a spearhead aimed directly at the German flank. Patton, operating on little sleep and fueled by a potent mix of anxiety and anticipation, pushes his corps commanders to attack without waiting for full concentrations of force. He understands that speed is the only currency that matters. Bastogne cannot hold out indefinitely. The German offensive has begun to lose its initial cohesion. Fuel shortages plague the panzer divisions, forcing them to abandon vehicles and slow their advance. The stubborn resistance at St. Vith and the refusal of Bastogne to fall have disrupted the strict timetable Hitler's plan required. The element of surprise is gone, replaced by a grinding battle of encounter. However, the German army remains a lethal adversary, and they begin to shift forces to block Patton's advance, turning the southern shoulder of the Bulge into a cauldron of violent confrontations. In Luxembourg, Patton paces his headquarters, checking the weather reports with obsessive frequency. He knows that his army can fight through the snow, but to truly shatter the German offensive, he needs the sky. He needs his tactical air support to scour the roads and pummel the German supply lines. The prayer he commissioned weeks earlier sits in his pocket, a tangible manifestation of his hope for a miracle. He dictates letters to his wife, expressing a strange mix of supreme confidence in his men and a fatalistic understanding of the carnage that awaits. He sees the battle not just as a relief operation, but as the decisive engagement of the war, a chance to destroy the German army in the West once and for all. As the final preparations for the Third Army's counterattack are laid, the battlefield freezes into a tableau of impending violence. Inside Bastogne, the defenders hoard their last rounds and bandage their wounds, listening to the sounds of battle drawing closer. To the south, thousands of tank engines cough to life in the frigid air, and infantrymen check their weapons with numb fingers. The irrevocable turning point has been reached. The decision made at Verdun is now manifest in the steel and flesh of 3 divisions hurtling northward. There is no turning back. The Third Army has abandoned its eastward drive into Germany to rescue the trapped garrison and sever the neck of the German salient. The static misery of Lorraine is a distant memory, replaced by the high-stakes drama of a rescue mission that will determine the outcome of the winter campaign. Patton has set his pieces in motion, and as the first tanks cross the line of departure, the fate of the campaign rests on their ability to drive through the ice and fire to reach the beleaguered town. Before we move on, please subscribe to our channel, Operation Zero. Don't forget to hit like and share this with fellow military enthusiasts. Alright, let's get back to it. The counteroffensive begins not with a roar of triumph, but with a grinding struggle against the elements and a determined enemy. On the morning of December 22nd, the Third Army lunges northward, its objective the besieged town of Bastogne and the severance of the German supply lines. Patton has ordered his commanders to drive with relentless speed, demanding that his armored columns assault through the night, ignoring the traditional military doctrine that dictates rest and regrouping. He believes that continuous pressure is the only way to shatter the German equilibrium. However, the reality on the ground is a friction of ice, fog, and prepared defenses. The tanks of the 4th Armored Division, the spearhead of the relief effort, struggle for traction on the glazed roads, their steel tracks sliding dangerously on the frozen surfaces. Visibility is near zero, forcing drivers to navigate by the dim outlines of the vehicles ahead, while German anti-tank gunners wait in ambush among the snow-draped firs. Progress is agonizingly slow. The German paratroopers and Volksgrenadiers barring the way fight with the desperation of men protecting their own lifeline. Every village becomes a fortress, every bend in the road a potential kill zone. The American tankers, accustomed to the rapid pursuits of the summer, find themselves engaged in a brutal slugging match where gains are measured in yards rather than miles. Patton, monitoring the reports from his headquarters, chafes at the delays. He projects an aura of supreme confidence to his staff, but privately he understands that time is bleeding away. The garrison in Bastogne is holding, but their resources are finite, and the German noose is tightening with every hour that the relief force remains stalled in the snow. Then, on December 23rd, the miracle occurs. For days, the skies have been a shroud of leaden gray, grounding the Allied air fleets and granting the Germans immunity from aerial attack. Patton's prayer for fair weather, distributed to the troops on thousands of small cards, seems to have been answered. A high-pressure system from the east sweeps across the Ardennes, scrubbing the sky clean. The sun rises over a landscape of blinding white, revealing a brilliant, azure dome overhead. The change in weather transforms the battlefield instantly. From airfields across England and France, a massive armada of bombers and fighter bombers takes wing. The roar of engines fills the air as thousands of aircraft stream toward the front, their wings glinting in the sunlight. For the soldiers on the ground, the arrival of the Air Force is a spectacle of deliverance. In the skies above Bastogne, flights of C-47 transport planes appear, dropping hundreds of colorful parachutes laden with ammunition, medical supplies, and rations. The defenders, who have been rationing artillery shells and scavenging food, watch with jubilation as the canisters drift down into their perimeter. It is a lifeline that revitalizes their capacity to fight. Simultaneously, the Tactical Air Command unleashes its fury on the German columns. Thunderbolts and typhoons swoop down on the exposed roads, strafing tank concentrations and supply trucks that have been stalled by the traffic jams of the offensive. The roads leading into the Bulge become graveyards of burning metal, as the Luftwaffe, despite a desperate sortie, fails to stem the tide of Allied air superiority. The psychological impact is profound. The German soldier, who days earlier marched with the hope of victory, now looks upward with dread, realizing that the protective cloak of winter weather has been stripped away. Despite the aerial pounding, the ground war remains a vicious stalemate. The Germans, realizing that the capture of Bastogne is essential to the survival of their offensive, launch renewed assaults on the perimeter. On Christmas Eve, the town is subjected to a savage aerial bombardment. The Luftwaffe, in a final spasm of offensive capability, drops bombs on the town center, reducing buildings to rubble and killing American medical personnel and wounded soldiers in a tragedy that mars the holiday. Inside the cellars and foxholes, the paratroopers celebrate a bleak Christmas, sharing meager rations and singing carols while the ground shakes from the impact of artillery. The German commander sends messages promising destruction, but the American resolve has hardened into granite. They are surrounded, the hole in the donut, but they are not broken. South of the town, the relief column fights its own desperate battle. The 37th Tank Battalion, led by the aggressive Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, pushes forward with a singular focus. Abrams, a commander who shares Patton's philosophy of violent forward motion, leads from the front, his tank chewing up the distance to the perimeter. The fighting is confused and deadly. In the village of Chaumont, American tanks run into an ambush of heavy German armor, suffering grievous losses in a chaotic melee. It is a check that would halt a lesser force, but Abrams regroups and shifts his axis of advance, probing for a weak point in the German cordon. Patton, constantly on the move in his open jeep, visits the division command posts, urging his generals to take greater risks, to bypass resistance, to keep moving at all costs. He knows that the relief of Bastogne is the hinge upon which the entire campaign turns. On December 26th, the breakthrough finally comes. Abrams identifies a gap in the German lines near the village of Assenois. He orders a concentrated artillery barrage to suppress the defenders, then sends a column of tanks and half-tracks charging through the smoke and debris. The lead tank, commanded by a young lieutenant named Charles Bogs, races through the village, guns blazing, crushing German infantry positions under its tracks. Breaking out into the open country beyond, Bogs spots the defensive lines of the 101st Airborne in the distance. He drives forward, wary of friendly fire, until a figure rises from a foxhole to greet him. The handshake between the tanker and the paratrooper marks the end of the siege. A narrow corridor has been opened, a lifeline of steel connecting the besieged garrison to the main body of the Third Army. Patton is jubilant, declaring the operation a brilliant success, but he knows the battle is far from over. The corridor is precarious, sweeping under German fire from both sides, and the enemy has not yet admitted defeat. Hitler, raging in his bunker, demands that the Bulge be held and Bastogne retaken. He shifts his elite SS Panzer divisions to the sector, throwing them against the widening American salient in a series of furious counterattacks. The weeks that follow the relief are among the bloodiest of the war. The narrative of the battle often focuses on the dramatic siege, but the fighting in January 1945 is a grinding, horrific struggle of attrition that tests the endurance of the American soldier to the breaking point. The weather turns even colder, dropping well below zero. The snow deepens, concealing mines and turning the simple act of walking into an exhausting ordeal. Men freeze in their foxholes. Frostbite becomes as great an enemy as the German army. The dead, frozen into grotesque statues, are stacked like cordwood awaiting burial. Patton's army, now reinforced, pushes northeast toward the town of Huffelise, seeking to link up with the First Army advancing from the north and pinch off the German salient. It is a slow, bloody process of reducing one fortified village after another. The Germans fighting here are the remnants of the Wehrmacht's best units, fighting with the fatalism of men defending their border. The 17th Airborne Division, a unit fresh to combat, is thrown into this maelstrom and suffers a baptism of fire on a windswept hill known as Dead Man's Ridge. They attack across open ground into the teeth of entrenched automatic weapons and dug-in tanks, suffering horrific casualties in the deep snow. Yet, they persist, learning the brutal lessons of infantry warfare in real time. Across the front, the violence is relentless. In the town of Chenon, American troops, embittered by the news of the Malmedy massacre, fight with a ruthless intensity, giving no quarter to the SS troops they encounter. The veneer of civilized warfare wears thin in the freezing cold, replaced by a raw, primal desire for vengeance and survival. Patton continues to drive his army, though he is deeply troubled by the suffering of his men. He visits the hospitals constantly, his heart breaking at the sight of the broken bodies, even as he demands more aggression from his commanders. He understands that the only way to end the misery is to finish the battle. He writes home, describing the black, frozen toes of the dead sticking out of the snow, a grim harvest of the Winter War. He maneuvers his corps with the skill of a master chess player, shifting divisions to exploit weaknesses, always looking for the opportunity to encircle and destroy. By mid-January, the German resistance begins to crack under the weight of the Allied pressure. The fuel shortages that plagued their initial advance have become critical, forcing crews to abandon their Tiger and Panther tanks on the roadside. The Grand Offensive has bled the Wehrmacht white, consuming the reserves that were meant to defend the Reich. On January 16th, a patrol from Patton's 11th Armored Division meets a patrol from the First Army in the ruins of Huffelise. The link-up marks the official end of the Battle of the Bulge. The Great Salient has been erased, the German army has been broken, and the road to Germany lies open. But the victory brings new frustrations for Patton. With the crisis averted, the Supreme Command returns to a broad front strategy that prioritizes the northern sector under Montgomery. Patton is ordered to assume an active defense, a term that is anathema to his nature. He views the order as a squandering of the momentum his troops have paid for in blood. He believes the German army is teetering on the brink of collapse and that a relentless pursuit is required to finish the war. He lobbies Bradley and Eisenhower, arguing that he should be allowed to keep attacking, to pierce the Siegfried Line and drive for the Rhine. When his arguments are rebuffed, he resorts to subterfuge, interpreting his orders with a flexibility that allows him to continue active operations that look suspiciously like full-scale offensives. The terrain ahead is the Eifel, a rugged landscape of hills, forests, and river valleys that favors the defender. The weather remains miserable, a thaw turning the frozen ground into a sea of mud that immobilizes vehicles as effectively as the snow. Yet, the Third Army claws its way forward. They breach the outer defenses of the Siegfried Line, cracking the concrete pillboxes and dragon's teeth that Hitler boasted were impregnable. They force crossings of the Prum and Kill rivers, engineering feats performed under heavy fire and in freezing water. The capture of the ancient city of Trier becomes a point of contention. When Higher Headquarters orders Patton to bypass the city because it would require 4 divisions to take, Patton sends a message back with characteristic glee. He has already taken Trier with 2 divisions and asks if he should give it back. As February turns to March, the Third Army breaks out into the Palatinate, the triangle of land west of the Rhine. Here, the armored divisions finally find the ground and the weather that allows them to maneuver. They slash through the German rear areas, causing the entire enemy front to collapse in confusion. German units surrender in the thousands, demoralized and disorganized by the speed of the American advance. The race is now on for the Rhine, the mystic river that serves as the final psychological and physical barrier to the heart of Germany. Patton is obsessed with reaching it before Montgomery, who is meticulously preparing a massive, set-piece crossing in the north. Patton wants to beat his rival to the prize, to demonstrate that American dash and audacity are superior to British caution. On March 22nd, the 5th Infantry Division reaches the Rhine at Nierstein. The moon is bright, illuminating the broad, swirling waters of the river. Patton does not wait for an aerial bombardment or a massive artillery preparation. He orders a surprise crossing that very night. In small assault boats, the infantry paddle silently across the river, catching the German defenders completely unaware. They establish a bridgehead on the eastern bank, and the engineers immediately begin the work of bridging the river. By the time the sun rises, the Third Army is across the Rhine. The news is sent to Bradley, who is delighted by the coup. Patton, however, wants the world to know. He urges Bradley to announce the crossing immediately, ensuring that the headlines belong to the Third Army before Montgomery launches his operation the following day. The success is a vindication of Patton's philosophy of war: speed, surprise, and the relentless will to attack. The following day, Patton himself crosses the pontoon bridge. Halfway across, he orders his driver to stop. He steps out of his jeep, walks to the edge of the floating bridge, and urinates into the Rhine. It is a gesture of supreme contempt for the Nazi regime and a personal marker of his triumph. He has fulfilled his destiny, leading his army from the beaches of Normandy, across the snows of the Ardennes, and now into the heart of the Reich. As he stands on the eastern bank, watching his tanks rumble past into the German interior, he scoops up a handful of dirt, emulating William the Conqueror. The barrier is breached. The war has entered its final act. Before we move on, please subscribe to our channel, Operation Zero. Don't forget to hit like and share this with fellow military enthusiasts. Alright, let's get back to it. With the Rhine crossed and the psychological barrier of the German border shattered, the Third Army pours into the heartland of the Reich. The resistance they encounter is spasmodic, a crumbling edifice of fanatical boys and exhausted veterans, yet the drive is not without its peculiar and controversial detours. Late in March, as the armored columns slash eastward, Patton fixates on a personal objective that lies deep behind enemy lines near the town of Heidelberg. He learns that his son-in-law is being held in a prisoner of war camp there, and the personal desire to liberate him overrides standard tactical caution. Patton orders a combat command to launch a special raid, a decision that meets with immediate resistance from his subordinates who view the mission as a dangerous diversion of resources for a private goal. Patton overrides their objections, though he compromises on the size of the force, sending a smaller task force led by a young major named Baum. The mission is framed as a liberation of American prisoners, but the specific interest in one particular officer is an open secret among the high command. The raid, known as Task Force Baum, becomes a tragic suicide run. The column fights its way through miles of hostile territory, reaches the camp, and liberates the prisoners, only to be surrounded and destroyed by converging German divisions. The operation ends in total failure, with heavy casualties and the capture of the survivors, including the task force commander. Patton is visibly shaken by the loss, writing to his wife with a rare admission of nervousness, though he publicly defends the operation as a necessary distraction to confuse the enemy. The failure remains a dark stain on the final weeks of the campaign, a moment where hubris and personal emotion cloud the judgment of the army commander. As April arrives, the nature of the war shifts from conquest to discovery, revealing the full, grotesque moral bankruptcy of the enemy. The Third Army advances into Thuringia, where they uncover the loot of a criminal empire hidden in a salt mine at Merkers. Patton, accompanied by Generals Eisenhower and Bradley, descends 2,000 feet into the earth in a rickety elevator, cracking jokes about promotions if the cable snaps. In the cavernous depths, they find a staggering hoard of gold bullion, currency, and priceless art, the plundered wealth of Europe stashed alongside the gold fillings torn from the mouths of victims. It is a scene of pirate treasure on an industrial scale, but it is merely the prelude to a far darker revelation. On April 4th, American troops liberate the Ohrdruf concentration camp, the first such site to be uncovered by Western allies. 8 days later, Patton, Eisenhower, and Bradley visit the camp to witness the atrocities firsthand. The generals, men who have spent years managing the business of death, are unprepared for the industrial slaughter they encounter. They walk past pyres of charred bodies, where the SS attempted to burn the evidence of their crimes on railroad tracks used as makeshift grills. They enter sheds filled with the emaciated corpses of prisoners who starved to death, their bodies stacked like lumber and sprinkled with lime. The stench of death is overpowering. Patton, the general who famously prizes toughness and aggressive violence, is physically overcome. He refuses to enter one room piled high with the dead, retreating to the side of a building to vomit. The sight of such calculated inhumanity shatters the professional detachment of the commanders. Eisenhower, his face a mask of cold fury, orders that every American unit in the area be marched through the camp to see what they are fighting against, ensuring that no one can ever call the atrocities propaganda. The discovery of the camps hardens the attitude of the conquerors, even as the strategic picture becomes clouded by politics. The Third Army is poised to strike toward Berlin or Prague, but the Supreme Command halts the advance at the Elbe River, leaving the German capital to the Red Army. Patton argues vehemently against this decision, pleading with Eisenhower to let him drive forward. He contends that history will judge them poorly for allowing the Soviets to dominate Central Europe. He dismisses the logistical arguments and political agreements, seeing only a military objective that is within his grasp and is being denied. His frustration mounts as he is forced to turn his axis of advance toward the dubious National Redoubt in the Alps and into Czechoslovakia, where he is again halted by political orders just as liberation seems imminent. The death of President Roosevelt in mid-April strikes a somber note at headquarters, leaving Patton and his peers to speculate late into the night about the future under Harry Truman. Patton expresses deep skepticism about the new leadership, fearing that the political will to stand up to the Soviets will evaporate. His distrust of the Russians becomes the defining obsession of his final days in command. As the Third Army links up with the Soviet forces, Patton's interactions with his Eastern allies are marked by barely concealed hostility. He views the Red Army not as liberators but as a new barbarian threat, undisciplined and dangerous. At a victory celebration, he refuses to drink a toast with a Soviet general until the interpreter brokers a fragile diplomatic truce where they agree to drink only to each other's desire to survive. The war in Europe ends not with a bang for the Third Army, but with a series of administrative ceasefires and the processing of hundreds of thousands of surrendering German troops. Patton's final great act of the war is the liberation of the massive prisoner of war camp at Mühlberg, where tens of thousands of Allied soldiers have languished. He arrives in his jeep, standing tall like a conquering Caesar, and is mobbed by weeping, emaciated men who see him as the personification of their deliverance. He orders the German flag cut down and tells the man who does it to use it for a vile purpose, a flash of the old, profane fire that endears him to the rank and file. Yet, the moment of victory is fleeting. When the German surrender is officially signed in May, Patton feels a profound sense of emptiness. At his final staff briefing, he thanks his officers with genuine emotion, crediting them with the Army's success, but later that night, alone with his inner circle, he confesses to feeling a crushing low, comparing himself to a whale at the bottom of the ocean. The destruction of the enemy is complete, but the warrior is left without a war. Peace proves to be a far more treacherous battlefield for Patton than the Ardennes. He returns to the United States for a victory tour, basking in the adulation of millions in Boston and Los Angeles. He stands in the open air of the Coliseum, mic in hand, and declares his love for the friction of war, a statement that thrills the crowd but unsettles the civilians who are eager to forget the slaughter. He reunites with his wife, Beatrice, but the intimacy is shadowed by his premonition that his life's purpose has been fulfilled and that only decline awaits. He tells his daughters he will never see them again before flying back to Europe, a prediction they dismiss but he holds with fatalistic certainty. Back in Germany, Patton is miscast as the military governor of Bavaria. The task requires tact, political nuance, and patience, qualities he neither possesses nor values. He is tasked with denazification, the systematic removal of former party members from positions of influence. Patton, however, views the process as inefficient and hypocritical. He is more concerned with rebuilding the German economy to serve as a bulwark against the Soviets than with punishing every low-level functionary who joined the party to keep a job. He ignores orders to purge the administration, retaining skilled German bureaucrats to keep the trains running and the power plants operating. His superiors, including Eisenhower, warn him repeatedly to toe the line, but Patton is incapable of suppressing his candor. The inevitable collision occurs in September. During a press conference, Patton attempts to explain his pragmatic approach to hiring former Nazis. When a reporter asks if he compares the Nazi Party to political parties in America, Patton agrees, suggesting that joining the party was often a matter of necessity similar to being a Democrat or a Republican. The comment is seized upon by the press and blown into a major scandal. The headline suggesting an American general equates Nazis with domestic political parties causes a firestorm in Washington. Eisenhower, exhausted by years of defending his brilliant but volatile subordinate, finally decides that Patton has become a liability he can no longer afford. Patton is summoned to Eisenhower's headquarters for a confrontation that ends his command. In a tense meeting, Eisenhower relieves him of the Third Army, the instrument he forged into the most feared fighting force in Europe. He is offered a face-saving transfer to the 15th Army, a paper command tasked with writing the history of the war. Patton accepts the demotion rather than resign, but the humiliation cuts deep. He returns to his headquarters to bid farewell to his staff in a ceremony composed of rain, tears, and the haunting strains of Auld Lang Syne. He hands over the Third Army to General Truscott and walks away, a king in exile stripped of his legions. The autumn of 1945 is a season of melancholy for the displaced general. He oversees a staff of historians and archivists, a task he performs with dutiful boredom. He fills his days with hunting and riding, trying to burn off the restless energy that once drove tank divisions across France. He visits old battlefields and attends dinners where he is treated with the reverence due a living monument, yet he feels increasingly alienated from the post-war world. He writes to his wife of his intention to resign his commission and return home for Christmas, planning a retirement where he can finally speak his mind without the muzzle of military protocol. The date is set. He will leave Europe in mid-December. On December 9th, the day before his scheduled departure, Patton decides to go pheasant hunting in the countryside near Mannheim. He is accompanied by his chief of staff, Hobart Gay, seeking a few hours of distraction in the field. They travel in his 1938 Cadillac limousine, a vehicle chosen for its roominess and power, driven by a young private who knows the general's preference for speed. The day is cold and clear, the German landscape scarred by the war but quiet. As they drive along a straight stretch of road, Patton observes the derelict vehicles rusting on the roadside, commenting on the wastefulness of war. The accident happens in a blink of mundane violence. An army truck approaching from the opposite direction turns suddenly across the road to enter a depot, cutting directly into the path of the Cadillac. The driver slams on the brakes, but the distance is too short. The limousine crashes into the truck's fuel tank at a relatively low speed. The collision is not catastrophic for the vehicle, and the other passengers are shaken but unhurt. Patton, however, is thrown forward from the back seat. His head strikes the steel partition separating the driver from the passengers with brutal force. He falls back, conscious but immediately aware that something is terribly wrong. He tells Gay that he cannot feel his arms and asks to be rubbed. There is no sensation. The impact has shattered his third and fourth cervical vertebrae, severing the spinal cord. The man who survived 2 world wars, who walked through artillery barrages and led the charge across continents, is instantly rendered a quadriplegic by a traffic accident on a quiet Sunday morning. Patton is rushed to a hospital in Heidelberg. The doctors who examine him realize the gravity of the injury immediately. He is paralyzed from the neck down, his body an inert weight below the chin. The prognosis is grim. Even if he survives the initial trauma, he will never walk or ride again. Patton accepts the news with a stoic calm that impresses the medical staff. He jokes grimly about his condition, calling it a hell of a way to start a leave. News of the accident flashes around the world, prompting an outpouring of shock and sympathy. Messages flood in from soldiers and statesmen, including the President and the British Prime Minister. His wife, Beatrice, flies from the United States to be at his bedside. She arrives to find him in traction, hooks inserted into his skull to stabilize his broken neck. For 12 days, Patton lies in his hospital bed, fully conscious of his fate. He talks with Beatrice, reminiscing about their life together, and dictates messages to his friends. He never complains about the pain or the cruelty of the timing. He simply endures, a good patient who treats the nurses with courtesy and obeys the doctor's orders, even as his strength fades. The end comes not from the spinal injury itself, but from the complications that arise from his immobilization. A pulmonary embolism strikes, followed by congestive heart failure. His lungs fill with fluid, and his breathing becomes labored. On December 21st, Beatrice is reading to him when he falls asleep. Later that afternoon, he dies quietly in his sleep, the fire finally extinguished. The funeral is held on Christmas Eve in Luxembourg, in the heart of the territory his army liberated at such great cost. It is a day of gray skies and freezing rain, the weather returning to the miserable conditions of the Bulge campaign. His casket is carried to the American Military Cemetery at Ham, a field of white crosses where thousands of his Third Army soldiers lie. He is not buried in Arlington or a grand tomb in California, but there, among his men, at the head of his troops one last time. The ceremony is simple and martial. Distinguished generals and representatives of foreign governments stand in the mud to pay their respects. The most poignant moment belongs to Master Sergeant William Meeks, the African-American orderly who served Patton faithfully throughout the war. Meeks, his face wet with tears and rain, accepts the flag that draped the general's coffin. He hands the folded triangle of stars and stripes to Beatrice Patton, salutes her sharply, and then turns away, overcome with grief. A firing squad delivers a 3-volley salute, the cracks of the rifles echoing off the surrounding hills. The story ends with the legendary general laid to rest in the soil of Europe, surrounded by the soldiers who followed him through the snow and fire to victory, an eternal commander remaining with his army in the final bivouac of the dead.